Wealth is a fortress, and sometimes, a prison. Behind gilded doors and crystal chandeliers, truths are buried deeper than secrets, and lies wear tuxedos and pearls. Emily Carter was never invited to this world of power, privilege, and poison. She came not to take, but to claim what was already hers. The daughter of a forgotten mistress, raised in the shadows while others dined under chandeliers, Emily steps into a world that never wanted her, armed only with a faded letter and the blood in her veins. They laughed. They mocked. They called her a mistake. But what they didn't know was that the past never forgets. And the dead? Sometimes, they speak louder than the living. This isn't just a fight for inheritance. It's a battle for truth. And she won't leave without it. The rain came down in cold, deliberate sheets as Emily Carter stepped out of the taxi, her breath fogging in the autumn air. The gravel crunched beneath her boots, a sound far too loud in the eerie silence that wrapped around the estate like a warning. Before her stood the Astor Mansion, a towering relic of old money and deeper secrets, with ivy crawling up its stone walls like veins feeding a long-dead heart. Emily tightened her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase, her knuckles bone-white, the rest of her body unmoving. For a moment, she simply stared. This was it. The place she had imagined in countless childhood daydreams and nightmares, where her father had lived his quiet, privileged life, far from the cramped apartment she had grown up in with her mother. Her heart beat louder than the rain. A swirl of dread and defiance rose in her chest as she inhaled, slow and steady. She wasn't here as a guest. She wasn't here for sympathy. She was here because she deserved to be, because she was his daughter too, even if no one else wanted to acknowledge it. Her father had written to her in secret over the years, letters filled with guilt and fragments of the love he was never brave enough to show in the open. But it was his final letter, sent days before his death, that had drawn her here now. That letter had changed everything. As she approached the grand entrance, every step felt heavier, like the house itself was trying to push her away. Behind those doors were the people who had erased her, dismissed her, and now likely feared her return. Cousins who never knew her name. A widow who saw her as a stain. But Emily wasn't the frightened child anymore. She was a woman now, hardened, intelligent, and carrying the one thing they couldn't silence, the truth. She raised her hand to knock. Rain dripped from her sleeve. And as her knuckles struck the wood, a hollow echo rang out that seemed to shake the very bones of the house. Inside, someone stirred. The game was about to begin. The heavy oak door groaned as it cracked open, letting a narrow beam of golden light stretch out across the rain-drenched porch. Emily stood motionless, soaked to the bone, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. The cold bit into her skin, but it wasn't the wind or the rain that made her shiver, it was the weight of the past looming just beyond that doorway. A tall, silver-haired butler emerged from the shadowed interior. His eyes were sharp and unreadable, trained by decades of discretion. He looked her over slowly, first her face, then her soaked clothes, then back to her eyes, pausing there for just a moment too long. "Name?" he asked, his voice polite but hollow. "Emily Carter," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her heart thudded violently in her chest. Recognition flickered across his features. His gaze lingered again, this time softer, almost curious. She could feel it happening again, the silent comparisons, the memory of her father etched into the contours of her face. She knew what he saw. And she hated it. Without a word, he stepped aside, pulling the door open with a reluctant grace. Emily stepped inside, crossing the threshold like someone entering a battlefield, not a home. The warmth hit her instantly, but it didn't bring comfort. Instead, it made her feel exposed, as if the house itself was watching her, breathing her in. The foyer was grand, colder than she remembered from childhood, the chandeliers casting long shadows over mahogany floors and oil paintings of long-dead relatives. Her damp boots echoed as she moved further in, each step like a challenge to the silence. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a warning, "You don't belong here." Then she heard it, the slow, deliberate click of heels descending the staircase. Elizabeth Astor. She appeared with the poise of a queen entering court, wrapped in a midnight silk robe, her hair pinned back with surgical precision, her expression carved from porcelain. Her eyes, steel blue and calculating, landed on Emily and held there, dissecting her inch by inch. "You must be Emily," Elizabeth said, her voice thin and cool. "How unexpected." Emily met her gaze without blinking. "I was invited." "Of course you were," Elizabeth replied, a small, venomous smile playing on her lips. He always did have a soft spot for broken things. The words hit like a slap, but Emily refused to flinch. She stood taller, willing her spine to steel. "I'm not broken. And I'm not here for pity." "No," Elizabeth murmured as she descended the final step. "You're here for the truth. And that, dear girl, comes with a cost." The air between them thickened with tension. The only sound was the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, each tick louder than the last, marking time like a countdown. Emily's voice was low and firm. "I deserve to know what really happened. Why he left. Why I was erased." For a heartbeat, something flickered behind Elizabeth's mask, anger, maybe, or fear. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a practiced calm. "You've walked into a house built on secrets, Emily," she said, turning away. "Be sure you're ready to hear them." And then she vanished down the hall, her footsteps barely making a sound. Emily stood in the center of the grand room, rain still dripping from her hair, her fists clenched, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed for her to run. But she didn't move. Not yet. Because beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, burned something else entirely. Determination. She hadn't come this far to be turned away by elegant cruelty. If this house had secrets, she would drag every one of them into the light, even if it meant burning it all down. The silence of the house was oppressive, a stillness that gnawed at Emily's nerves as she walked through the vast, dimly lit hallway. The grandeur of the mansion was overwhelming, but it felt cold, hollow, like a place where warmth and love had long since evaporated, leaving only a brittle shell. Each step she took echoed against the marble floors, the sound unnervingly loud in the thick air. It felt as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, watching her, waiting for her to make her next move. As she walked, her gaze flickered over the portraits on the walls. The faces of distant relatives, frozen in time, faces she had never known, yet somehow felt she should have. Every portrait was a reminder of the family she had never fully belonged to, the legacy she had been kept away from. The unsettling feeling in her chest grew tighter with every passing second. She was walking deeper into a maze of secrets, each turn leading her further away from the woman she thought she was and closer to the woman she feared becoming, someone who couldn't escape the past. Her breath hitched as the soft click of heels on marble sounded behind her, breaking her reverie. She turned sharply, her pulse quickening. Elizabeth was there, appearing from a shadowy alcove, holding a glass of red wine in one hand. Her lips were painted the same dark shade as the wine, the contrast stark against her pale skin. Her eyes, however, were the most unsettling, calm, unbothered, as if she already knew everything that was about to happen. Emily's throat tightened, and she held her ground, though her hands were beginning to tremble. "I've come for the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "I won't leave here until I have it." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, a small, knowing smile curling at the corners of her lips. She took a leisurely sip from her glass, her gaze lingering on Emily as if she were a puzzle to be solved. "Truth? Is that what you think you want?" Her voice was silk, but there was an edge to it now, a subtle challenge in the way she regarded Emily. "The truth has a way of changing everything. Emily swallowed hard, frustration bubbling up from deep inside her. The bitterness in Elizabeth's words stung, but she refused to let it deter her. "I want to know why he left me," she said, her voice a little more forceful now, laced with the years of pain and confusion that had built up. "Why he shut me out. Why he made me feel like I didn't matter." Elizabeth's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Sympathy? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the same cool detachment. She gave a small nod and, with a flourish, began walking toward the large, imposing double doors at the end of the hallway. The sound of her heels clicking sharply against the floor seemed to reverberate in Emily's chest, each step pulling her closer to something she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. Emily followed, each step a mixture of dread and determination. She didn't know what she was walking into, but there was no turning back now. Her heart hammered in her chest, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she might find. It was too late to back out, too late to pretend she didn't need to know. Elizabeth pushed the heavy doors open, the sound of them creaking in the quiet air. The room beyond was bathed in shadow, save for the faint glow of a single desk lamp that illuminated the dark wood of a massive desk in the center of the room. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents a mix of old, worn volumes and neatly arranged photographs, most of them featuring her father, though the faces in the pictures were unfamiliar to her. Emily's gaze was drawn immediately to the desk, where piles of papers were stacked high, some neatly arranged, others scattered carelessly across the surface. Envelopes, documents, letters, each one a piece of a puzzle she had spent years trying to understand. She could feel her pulse quicken, the weight of her questions pressing against her chest. This was it. The answers she had been denied for so long were here, in this room. But before she could take a step forward, a voice, a deep, gravelly voice, stopped her in her tracks. "Don't." The word was barely above a whisper, but it held so much weight, so much authority, that Emily froze where she stood. Her blood ran cold as she turned toward the doorway, the figure that had appeared there instantly familiar. Samuel. He stood in the shadows, his silhouette barely discernible, but Emily recognized him immediately. Her godfather. The man who had always been a distant figure in her life, never fully present but always lurking in the background, watching. And now he was here, blocking her way, his eyes filled with something she couldn't place, something dark and regretful. "Samuel," she breathed, her voice trembling despite her attempt to remain composed. "Why are you here? What are you trying to stop me from doing?" He stepped further into the room, the light finally catching his face. There was a weariness in his features, a heaviness in his expression that seemed to weigh him down. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were now shadowed with something that looked like fear. "Emily," he began, his voice low and strained. "You don't know what you're asking for. The truth. It's not something you can just uncover without consequences." Emily's heart raced as she took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I have a right to know," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "All these years, I've been kept in the dark. It's my life, Samuel. My father's life. I need to understand why everything happened the way it did." Samuel's eyes darkened as he moved closer, his tone growing more urgent. "You're not ready to hear it," he insisted. "The truth will tear you apart. Your father made choices to protect you from the things you don't understand, the things you couldn't have known about. He kept you safe in ways that would destroy everything you thought you knew about him." Emily's mind raced, the words churning in her head, but none of them made sense. She had spent so long fighting for answers, for any glimpse into her father's world, and now she was being told she wasn't ready? That the truth would destroy her? No. She wouldn't let fear stop her now. "I'm done being protected," she said, her voice rising with emotion, her breath catching in her throat. "I want to know everything. The truth, no matter what it costs. Samuel hesitated, the pain in his eyes intensifying. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze flickering between Emily and the desk before finally resting on her face. His jaw tightened, as if he were making a decision in that moment, a decision that had been weighing on him for far too long. With a sigh, he stepped aside, his body language giving way to an unspoken defeat. "Then go ahead," he murmured, his voice hollow. "But remember, once you open that door, there's no turning back." Emily's breath caught in her chest as she stepped toward the desk, her fingers trembling as they brushed over the surface of the papers. The moment had come. The truth was within her grasp, and she would not let fear stand in her way. The room was silent, save for the faint rustling of paper as Emily stood frozen in front of the desk, her hands trembling. It felt as though time had slowed, each moment stretching and curling into itself like an endless wave crashing over her. The weight of the decision she had just made pressed down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. Her pulse raced, and the air felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension. She had crossed a line now, there was no going back. She looked down at the stack of letters in front of her, her fingers lingering over the edges, hesitating. Her stomach churned as she thought of the choices that had led her to this moment, choices she hadn't fully understood until now. She had come here, seeking the truth, seeking closure, but the truth, as it often did, seemed more elusive the closer she got to it. The letters before her were more than just words, they were pieces of her father's life, his secrets, his choices. And now they were hers to bear. She picked up the first letter, a simple, yellowed sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's elegant script, each curve and swoop of the ink bringing a flood of memories. She remembered the way he would write letters to her as a child, the way he would hold her hand as they walked through the park, telling her that everything would be okay, that nothing could harm them. But now, those words felt hollow, like lies woven into the very fabric of their lives. She unfolded the letter, the paper crinkling in her hands as she scanned the words. At first, the meaning eluded her, each sentence seeming more cryptic than the last. But as her eyes moved over the pages, certain phrases jumped out at her, phrases that left her breathless, her mind reeling. Words like betrayal, danger, and legacy. She read them again, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about her father. It was something much deeper, something darker. Her thoughts raced, her mind spinning with questions, but there was no time to dwell on them. She had to keep going. She couldn't stop now. Not when she was this close to the truth. The next letter was from someone she hadn't expected to hear from, Elizabeth. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter, her breath hitching in her throat. The weight of her father's secrets had already been too much to bear, but now this? Elizabeth had always been a distant figure in Emily's life, a shadowy presence that lurked in the background. She had never fully trusted Elizabeth, but she had never imagined she would be a part of this world. As she read the letter, a sickening realization began to form in the pit of her stomach. Elizabeth knew more than she had let on. She had always known. The letter was filled with veiled warnings, cryptic phrases that hinted at things Emily wasn't ready to understand. But there was one thing that stood out, one sentence that seemed to burn itself into her mind. "I did what I had to do. You don't understand the consequences of what you're asking. If I had told you the truth, it would have destroyed you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily's chest tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Elizabeth had known. She had known the truth about her father, about everything. And she had kept it from Emily, kept it hidden, protected her, or so she claimed. But from what? What was Elizabeth trying to protect her from? She read on, her eyes scanning the rest of the letter, her stomach turning with every word. The people her father had been involved with, those names, those faces, none of them were strangers. Emily had heard whispers over the years, rumors of shady dealings, of connections that went beyond the surface. But she had never known how deep it went, how far it stretched. Until now. The final sentence of the letter sent a chill down her spine. There are people who will stop at nothing to keep the past buried. If you keep digging, there's no turning back. You've been warned. Emily dropped the letter onto the desk, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She felt as though the walls around her were closing in, the air growing heavier, suffocating. She staggered back, her mind reeling, trying to process the weight of what she had just learned. Everything she had ever known about her family, about her father, was a lie. She could feel the ground beneath her shifting, her sense of self cracking apart. Emily, a voice broke through her thoughts, rough and strained. Samuel. She turned to face him, but his gaze was distant, unreadable, as though he had already resigned himself to what was coming. His eyes were filled with something dark, something she couldn't quite place. You need to stop, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You don't know what you're dealing with. But Emily didn't listen. She couldn't. Her mind was consumed by the letter, by the weight of the revelations that had just come crashing down on her. She had spent so long trying to find the truth, and now that it was right in front of her, she couldn't turn away. I need to know, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering in her chest. I need to understand. Samuel's face tightened, and he stepped forward, his hands outstretched, as if he were trying to keep her from falling further into this abyss. You don't get it, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Once you know the truth, once you see it for yourself, you can never unsee it. It will change everything. And there will be no going back. Emily's eyes burned with a mixture of fear and defiance. She had already crossed the point of no return. There was no turning back now. The truth was like a force of nature, and it was pulling her deeper into the storm. Her gaze dropped to the final letter, the thick, leather-bound document that had been tucked away in the corner of the desk. She felt a strange sense of inevitability wash over her as she reached for it. This was it. The final piece. The thing that would finally make sense of everything. Or destroy her in the process. With shaking hands, she opened it. The first page was dated years ago. Her father's handwriting, familiar, yet distant, was the same as the other letters. She read, her heart racing, her mind scrambling to keep up with the flood of information. And then, at the bottom of the page, her father's final words appeared, words that made her blood run cold. Protect her, no matter the cost. Her throat tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her father had known. He had known the dangers of what he had been involved in. He had known what was coming. And he had left her to face it alone. Samuel stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes filled with fear. You don't understand what you've just uncovered, he said, his voice trembling. You're not prepared for this. But Emily didn't need his warnings. She didn't need anyone's protection. The truth had been unleashed, and there was no stopping it now. The war had begun. Emily's fingers tightened around the letter, its edges crinkling beneath her grip. Her heart was racing, an overwhelming mix of emotions threatening to break through the walls she had spent years building. Anger, confusion, and something darker, something colder, swirled within her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had wanted answers, had spent countless hours piecing together the fragments of her past, but now that she had them, the truth felt more like a burden than liberation. Her father's handwriting, shaky yet determined, haunted her thoughts. Protect her, no matter the cost. Those words, written in his final moments, gnawed at her. Who was he talking about? Who had he been protecting, and why had he kept it from her? She forced herself to look up, meeting Samuel's gaze. His expression was clouded with uncertainty, his brows furrowed in an expression of deep concern. His eyes softened for a moment, before hardening with something she couldn't quite read. Fear? Worry? She couldn't tell, but what she did know was that the man who had been her confidant, her partner in this search, was no longer certain that this path was the right one for her. Emily, Samuel's voice was strained, thick with emotion. You can't just rush into this without knowing what you're getting yourself into. There's so much more to this than what's in those letters. You're going up against people who won't hesitate to do anything to keep their secrets hidden. People who have been waiting for this moment. Her pulse quickened at the mention of people, shadowy figures she had only heard about in whispered conversations. The idea that there were others watching, others who wanted to silence her, made her blood run cold. But even so, there was a fire burning in her chest that refused to be extinguished. She had always lived in the dark, always surrounded by unanswered questions. Now that the light was beginning to break through, she couldn't stop herself. She had to know what was buried in those words, even if it meant everything she knew would fall apart. I have to do this, Samuel, Emily said, her voice trembling, but firm. I can't keep living like this, half in the dark, not knowing the truth. My father, he kept this from me, but why? What was so dangerous that he couldn't tell me? I won't walk away until I understand why he hid this from me. Samuel's shoulders tensed as if bracing for a blow. He took a slow step closer, his hands raised in a gesture that was meant to calm her, but all it did was frustrate her more. His voice dropped to a soft, almost pleading tone. You don't understand. These aren't just words on paper. There are real people involved in this, people who will do anything to keep the truth buried. People who would stop at nothing to make sure you never uncover what your father left behind. You can't do this alone. She shook her head, the tension in her muscles radiating like an electric current. I don't care anymore, she snapped, her voice a little too sharp, betraying the storm brewing inside. I don't care who I have to face or what I have to do. I just want the truth. His expression faltered, eyes flickering with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it fear for her? He took another slow step back, as though she had become a danger he didn't fully understand. A part of her wondered if he was afraid of her now, afraid of the person she was becoming. Afraid of what she might uncover, and who she might become in the process. You have no idea what you're up against, Emily, Samuel continued, his voice strained. The people your father was trying to protect you from, they've been watching you for a long time. And once they realize you've found the letter, once they realize you're getting too close, they won't hesitate to erase everything. You're not ready for this. Her chest tightened, the weight of his words sinking in deeper than she wanted to admit. The world she thought she understood was suddenly so much darker. But that only made her more determined. She wasn't going to run from this. She couldn't. Not now. I don't have a choice, she muttered, her voice barely audible. The choice was made for me the moment I found these letters. She stood taller now, as though the very act of speaking the words out loud had crystallized her resolve. The uncertainty that had once gripped her began to dissipate, replaced by a steady, cold clarity. This wasn't just about her father's secrets anymore. This was about something far bigger than her, something that had been lurking in the shadows of her family's history. She was just the spark that would set it all alight. With trembling fingers, she folded the letter and placed it into her pocket, her hand brushing over the edge of the yellowed paper as if to reassure herself that it was still there. A reminder that no matter how much fear clawed at her insides, she had come too far to turn back. The silence between them stretched longer, heavy with unspoken words. Samuel's eyes seemed to pierce through her, searching for any sign of doubt, any hesitation, but all he found was determination. Finally, he sighed, a deep, weary sound that made her stomach clench. You're right, he said softly, his shoulders slumping as though he had given up the fight. You're not going to listen to me, are you? Emily shook her head. There was no time for doubt, no time for second-guessing. She had already crossed the point of no return. "I'm doing this. Whether you help me or not," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Samuel stepped back, his eyes lingering on her for a long, heavy moment. Finally, he turned, as though he had already accepted the inevitable. "Just remember," he said over his shoulder, his voice distant, "there's no going back after this. You will lose more than you think, Emily. More than you're willing to give." His words hung in the air, a grim reminder of the cost of uncovering the truth. Emily didn't respond, only watched as he left the room, her heart a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. There was no turning back. She had known that from the start. With a final glance at the door where Samuel had just exited, Emily gathered the last of her strength and turned back to the desk. There, resting in front of her, was the truth. The one thing she had been searching for all her life. And now, there was nothing left to do but uncover it. In the end, it wasn't the diamonds or the estate that mattered. It was the truth that shattered the silence, and the courage to speak it. Emily didn't come to destroy a legacy. She came to expose it. To peel back the layers of pretense and show the world that bloodlines are not defined by wealth, but by pain, love, and the will to endure. She stood alone in a room full of enemies and didn't flinch. She made them see her, not as a beggar, not as a joke, but as a woman whose story refused to be erased. And as she walked away, she didn't just carry her father's last letter. She carried her name, restored, unshaken, and finally, hers.